humor in tech writing, making some Gradle warnings go away, some modern major journal parodies, and the usual combination of tweets and toots. Welcome to Tales from the Jar Side. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ken Kousen. This is my newsletter, Tales from the Jar Side, in video form. And on Tales from the Jar Side, we try to explain not just what's going on in the IT world, but why you should care and what things you shouldn't care about. So let's start this week. This is the newsletter for the week of June 2nd through 9th. Today is June 10th. And last week I taught my latest features in Java course as a No Fluff Just Stuff virtual workshop. That was a lot of fun. I always like teaching the new features course. Although I got to say, there's getting to be a lot of features that have been added to Java since Java 8. That class is getting very full. Oh, the subtitle this week is A Weasel Walks into a Bar and the bartender says, "Wow, I've never seen a weasel here before. What can I get you?" "Pop," goes the weasel. Yeah, I apologize. That's really bad. I've used that one before, I think, or at least I've heard it before, but it's a classic. Yes. Regular readers of and listeners to, and of course, video viewers of this newsletter are affectionately known as jarheads and are far more intelligent, sophisticated, and attractive than the average newsletter reader or listener or viewer. If you wish to become a jarhead, please subscribe either on the button on the newsletter hosted on Substack, that's at kenkousen.substack.com, or on the YouTube channel. You're always welcome there. Let's jump into our first section. So I want to talk to you about the high-risk, high-reward phenomenon of using humor in technical writing or in presentations for that matter. I have a bit of a reputation as someone who can be funny in presentations. I have to clarify that, like many clever people, I suppose you would say, as many bright people are, I'm pretty good at free association, and that gives me a good sense of humor, which I connect when I'm able to connect existing phenomena to jokes I've heard or funny situations or things like that. I am self-aware enough to know that by no stretch of the imagination am I a comedian. That's a hard job. That's really tough. I don't plan out routines or anything like that. I collect jokes and funny stories, and I wait for the opportunity to use them during a presentation or during writing. The problem, of course, and I mention this, is that a lot of people think they're funnier than they are, and I'm probably included in that. And also, when somebody's trying to learn something and they're confused, the last thing they want is to hear somebody make jokes. They're not interested in hearing any of that at that point. So you have to be very careful. You have to make sure that you are not just making gags because you're bored or because you're trying to entertain when somebody just wants the answers. The only time to use humor is to keep people interested or to keep things a little bit more lively so that things don't become boring. That does happen with a lot of technical stuff. I mentioned in the newsletter, the reason this came up this week is my editor and the other people at the company, the publishing company, are currently reviewing the first 3 chapters of my book, the one in progress called Adding AI to Java. And one of the bits of feedback I got from my editor on a chapter, which really surprised me, was you might want to add some more humor or more stories to keep people interested. And I put in the reaction that I imagine a lot of you are going, "Oh my goodness, no," or "Does she have any idea what she's asking?" or has she even met me before?" That sort of thing. And I sympathize, but I'm like, okay, let's look into this. Now, in order to keep humor unobtrusive, in order to make it so it's not a distraction, and again, the book or the presentation is not about me, but it's about the learner, I've always tried to make the humor be something you could skip if you wanted to. And in my first book, the Making Java Groovy book, I put all the humor in the footnotes. And that turned out to work really, really well. I have 3 or 4 footnotes per chapter, or sometimes many more, sometimes as many as 8 or 10. And they're basically all the gags that had worked in class at one time or another, or something that occurred to me as an aside, or maybe extra information that just kind of fit. Now, I never went overboard with them. I didn't write page after page of footnote type stuff, but I always put in gags. And I mentioned a couple of them. I went and looked at my book on the O'Reilly Learning Platform and just spent a pleasant amount of time reviewing it. It's been since 2013 when that book came out. So it's been over 10 years. And I was skimming through it and remembering, some of the fun stuff in it. I always liked Groovy. I always really enjoyed writing that book. It just took years, which I don't know I could get away with anymore. But I mentioned a couple, like I mentioned that you want to do this, use a library function rather than doing it yourself, and reinventing the flat tire. And the footnote pointed out that reinventing the flat tire is what happens when you reinvent the wheel and get it wrong. I'm sure I heard that somewhere. Or I put my book in a collection of an XML block. That's how old this book was. And I put my book in with a couple of others, and I put a footnote said I had to find some way to include my book in that august company just to bask in the reflected glory. That sort of humor. Or just some mandatory jokes, like I talked about using Groovy to make domain-specific languages, and mentioned I had a couple of mandatory DSL jokes, like JavaScript is a DSL for finding browser bugs, or Java is a DSL for generating stack traces, or even Maven's a DSL for downloading the internet. Okay, Gradle is also a DSL for downloading the internet. It's just a hard problem, but we'll come back to that. But you get the idea. It was gags that I'd heard or sometimes an offhand comment I wanted to make, and it really livened up the book for me. Plus, when I was able to show the book to some of my non-technical friends, it gave them something to skim through rather than simply, just breezing through it and going, oh, that's nice, but I don't understand any of this. And I like that. And the people who did read it were able to focus on the technical stuff. And once they got the technical stuff and were going back, they could see the gags. And I got a lot of positive feedback on that. By the way, I mentioned also I did a whole section on testing with the Spock framework. And of course, Spock-related puns wrote themselves. It's a logical framework for enterprise testing. I had to clarify that one once. I made that comment in a talk, and somebody came up to me and said, can you use it for regular unit testing too? And I said, yeah, the enterprise part's just part of the joke, see? Oh, okay. So that's the problem with a dry sense of humor, by the way, is that if somebody doesn't get the joke, you just come across looking like an idiot. So I have to watch out for that as well. So I mentioned my two guiding principles of humor in tech writing and presentations, which is that, again, you're not as funny as you think you are, meaning me, and that if somebody's confused, don't try to make them laugh. So keeping jokes in the footnotes worked for that. Now, when I left Manning and started writing for O'Reilly, I wound up with a problem. Oh, I did mention in the newsletter that the most backhanded compliment I ever got, I got from my friend Stu, when he read the book, and he said what he loved about the humor was that it was in the footnotes so that he could skip the jokes. And I'm like, yeah, some compliment. Thank you so much. You're welcome. But what else is I going to say? At any rate, I moved to the O'Reilly Learning Platform, O'Reilly Media, and I wrote 2 recipes books and a cookbook. And the problem with those is that there's really no room for humor there, because each thing you're reading, you don't read that cover to cover. You just find the recipe that covers the task you're trying to accomplish and just read that. So humor would be a bit of a distraction. I tried to put things in here and there, but it wasn't really a lot. So even though I wrote, and I mentioned the books, Gradle Recipes for Android and Modern Java Recipes and Kotlin Cookbook, I wasn't actually able to really put much humor in there. The one place where I did get some humor out of it is here in the newsletter is a picture of the cover of Kotlin Cookbook. And if you're not familiar with O'Reilly Media, they always put these animals on the cover, many of which are endangered or just they picked an animal for some reason. And for my book, they put this thing on here, which is what I think they call it a kinkajou, as it turns out, some long-tailed mammal native to Central and South America. I don't know much about it. I remember that when we were writing the book, they said, hey, is this okay? And I went, yeah, okay. That's about the extent of it. It's not like they give me a range of animals to pick from or anything like that. I didn't have a strong preference, so they just picked it. But the funny part is that a friend of mine who was non-technical saw the book cover and said, is that a Kotlin? And you're talking about how to cook Kotlins in this book? And of course, no, that wasn't the idea at all, but I decided to run with that. So when I convinced my local Barnes & Noble to carry the book, I took one of the copies out of the computer section and I moved it over to the cookbook section and left it in there just to see what would happen. And when I visited again a couple of days later, of course, what happened is what you'd expect. Somebody moved it back. Oh, well, seemed funny at the time to me. I've started adding gags back in these Pragmatic Programmers books, but there's not really a good place to put the gags that are unobtrusive again. I'm back to using footnotes. The problem is that with Pragmatic Programmers, their house style restricts you to using footnotes only as URLs. If you reference a spec or reference some documentation, you could put in a footnote, which is the link to that. And that's kind of it. If you try to put in more, they push back against you. And I've decided these are battles I'll never win, so I'm not going to try to fight it. However, in the current book, I'm talking about integrating AI with Java, which means I actually I realized I have an opportunity here. So when I ask an AI tool a question, I could just report on what the answer is, or I could put in some humor. So for example, I put in this test case when I was trying to talk to Llama 3 via the Ollama system. And if you could see this, I'll just tell you the question I posed was, are you ready to put lots of coders out of business today? And of course, the answer is something like that I'm expecting is, nobody could possibly be stupid enough to think you could replace actual coders with an AI. That would be silly. I'm just a tool that sometimes helps and sometimes doesn't. Plus, I may be cheap now, but wait until your entire department has been outsourced to me and see what happens to the prices after that, with an evil laugh. So obviously Llama 3 didn't respond with that. Actually, I'm kind of disappointed in a lot of Llama 3's responses. And by the way, one thing that is an overriding principle I've learned about these AI tools, they have no sense of humor to speak of. They're terrible at humor. They will tell you a joke because they all draw on the same family of open source jokes that they can just supply, but none of them are funny at all. So I'm going to take the opportunity to make humorous comments and hope that everybody gets it. And we'll see how that goes. So that was a lot of fun. And I'm actually retrofitting a lot of earlier questions and answers in the book just to do that. So that may be a bug or a feature, depending on how you look at it. I'll let you know more as we get closer. Let's move to the next section. Okay, this section is called Gradle, Java 21, JUnit, Reactive Spring, all these different topics. And basically, the one technical thing I did this week, or one of the few technical things I did this week, is I finally made some annoying warnings go away. Gradle is always giving me warnings of one form or another, and it's really annoying. I always think, oh, I'll just upgrade to the latest version. Then they have warnings about things that are going to be deprecated in the version after that. And it's just frustrating finding ways to make warnings go away. And I don't know why I care so much. I probably shouldn't, but I do anyway. And this week, I finally managed to make some warnings go away when using JUnit tests with Java 21 in my Gradle file. Turns out that in build.gradle, you always have a section where you're customizing your test task in order to use JUnit platform. That call tells Gradle to look for JUnit 5 tests. Been doing that for years, no problem. If you do that with Java 21, let me show you what happens. Now, what you see here is a line in the Gradle build that I'm going to add, and I've now commented it out. And down below, when I executed it, you see I get this series of warnings. A Java agent has been loaded dynamically. If a serviceability tool is in use, blah, blah, blah. It says, please run with this flag to hide the warning. And if a serviceability tool is not in use, run with something else. And then I get back the right answer. I'm getting really tired of seeing that warning in there. I went and added that element. Okay, now I put in that particular flag, and I had to figure out how to put in that flag, but I did figure it out. And that the warning at the top went away, but there's still one in here about some open JDK 64-bit server VM warning. Sharing is only supported for bootloader classes because Bootstrap class path has been appended. I got to tell you, if you're glazed over, what the heck does that mean? I have no idea. I don't know what that's about at all. And I've been coding in Java for, 25 years. I guess I just never needed that level of detail. But Google's heard of it. I pasted it into Google. Unfortunately, I don't have that AI stuff enabled. So it gave me a link to the actual right page. And it turns out this is what you want to put in. So here I have that enable dynamic agent loading flag. And here I have xshare is off. And now when I run the exact same test, it all comes back. and there's no more warnings. Yay. Okay. Does it mean anything? Not really, but I'm glad I got rid of the warnings. I'm just happy. So I thought I'm going to forget this, even though I'm going to try copying it and pasting it to a whole bunch of different projects I have, but I thought I'd document it. So in the newsletter, I added that line, and that's using the Kotlin DSL, and I also put it in as to, I'm sorry, that was in the Groovy DSL. I also showed what it looked like in the Kotlin DSL, which looks pretty much identical. And I figured as long as I'm getting rid of Gradle warnings, if you use Gradle with Spring Boot and the Web Flux module, the so-called reactive Spring stuff, then you all, and by the way, you're on a Mac with the M1 or above chip, the Apple Silicon, as they say, then there's another dependency you want to add. And here is a little block of code that you could add to say, am I on a Mac? Am I using the Apple Silicon, the A architecture, 64-bit stuff? And if so, add this dependency, and I updated it to its latest version. And then those warnings will go away too, because you get some weird DNS resolver warning. And again, I don't know why. I don't know how long it'll last, but what the heck? I figured, let me get that warning to go away too. And I have. So that's what that whole section was about. I hope you find it interesting of some way or another. Let's move on to our tweets and toots. Yes, this one. Sigh. Let me magnify that. It says, nobody has their slides ready a week before. And the guy is holding up a sign where it's been clearly modified to say, stop asking for slides a week in advance of a talk. And I'm like, oh yeah. And it got even worse for me recently because I'm giving a brand new course sometime in June in July rather. And I received a message from a person in the administration saying, oh, please send over your slides a month before and try to use this template that we prepared for PowerPoint, which I don't even use PowerPoint. And that way I can review them. And I'm like, if I respond to this, it's not going to be good. It's the same way, same attitude I have toward the TSA, the Transportation Safety Administration. It's a joke. It's security theater. It accomplishes nothing. And you'd have to be the world's stupidest terrorist to get caught by those people. And therefore, I don't want to say or do anything, because if I say a word, then I'm going to get pulled out of line for extra screening and all that. I'm going to get delayed and miss my flight and all of that. And same thing here. If I tell this person what I actually believe, it's just going to start a whole argument. I'm just going to ignore that as long as I possibly can, and passive aggression for the win. See how it works out. Okay, next one. This was great. This was a tweet that somebody repeated. Said, my 3-month-old son is now twice as big as when he was born. See the little baby there, and there's the much bigger baby there. And he says he's on track to weigh 7.5 trillion pounds by age 10. Yeah, it's a straight line, right? Just follow the straight line the way you're going. And if this reminds you of AI capabilities, growing. Oh, look how quickly AI is getting better. Obviously, we just connect out a straight line and it's going to be AGI in 6 months and it's going to change all our lives and all that. That's not how these things tend to work. Let's give it a little time. Let's see how it goes. Okay. This was a great SQL lesson. And the post says, back in the 90s, Stacy Lindbergh, whoever that is, taught me that when deleting from the production database, to always write the statement as a select first, then edit it to be a delete after auditing it, presumably making sure that you got back what you were expecting to get back. This advice has saved my ass at least once a year since. And yes, that's a great idea. You write it as a select because the only thing you have to change is the word select to the word delete, and to get rid of the stuff that you had. And this way you're sure that you're deleting exactly what you intended and not accidentally commenting out the where clause or something horrible like that. This one I put in the title. I find this statement, which of course I don't. It says, beware that many people want to be offended. Outrage gives them an intoxicating sense of moral superiority. So desperate are they to be mad that they'll actively seek out provocations online, willfully misinterpret your words, and even imagine you said things you didn't. Now, fortunately, I'm not a big enough blogger or YouTuber or whatever that this has happened to me yet, but you know how it is, and this makes a lot of sense. I fully expect this to be a real thing at some point. So I thought I would include it here just so you could see it. good lesson to keep in mind. What I said over the next few months, what I was implying was between now and the elections in the US coming in November. This one was the very model of a post, and I have to give you at least some of it because at first I started reading it and I didn't get it. I cannot stand the parodies of modern Major General. They're overdone and simply not as good as the original. They've done them about everything, whatever topic, big or small. And when I notice one of them, my eyes will always start to roll. And it wasn't until I got down to near the bottom, they emphasized, in short and matters musical, prosodic, and ephemeral. I cannot stand the parodies of modern Major. I finally realized, oh, that's what this is. This is a modern Major General parody. And the problem is, in part of it, they messed up the meter here. Not the meter, it doesn't scan. It says they rushed the complicated words, had to rhyme with adding many fricatives will turn it so cacophonous. I'm not sure what cacophonous was supposed to rhyme with there, but it doesn't work. So I took it and I said, okay, I get it now. And I went to GPT-4o and I said, here, fix this. And the way I told it to fix it is I just copied the image and paste it in because it's got that nice vision model built into it now. I said, read that and fix it. And it went, okay. So I didn't have to retype it or copy and paste or anything like that. I just copied the image and pasted that in. And it fixed it. Now it's got the diction's always slurry when they rush the complicated words, and adding many fricatives will turn it all quite so absurd. The slanted rhymes are silly and they just keep making more and more. Please, someone stop the parodies of modern Major General. It's better. It's still not great. Again, these tools are not great at creative tasks. They're great at doing what everybody's done before. So fine, that's okay. And I remember, of course, this made me think about the Pirates of Penzance, because if you're not familiar with it, that is the modern Major General song from the Pirates of Penzance, done at Warp 2 in the movie, by the way, which is a brilliant movie. This movie with Kevin Kline in it called The Pirates of Penzance. The Major General sings it once quickly, and then the Pirate King, Kevin Kline, says to him, can you do it again really fast? And he's, of course, and goes zipping through. It's just amazing. It's a wonderful job. And they've got some really weird stuff in the rhyming scheme from William Gilbert, from Gilbert and Sullivan. Sullivan wrote the music. Gilbert wrote all the lyrics, in case you're not aware. I was never in Pirates of Penzance. There was never a part for me. I was too old to be Frederick or never seemed like a Frederick. And that's the only voice part I really would have fit. And I didn't want to take some chorus role or whatever. But I did get to play in a review that had a couple of Pirates scenes in it. And the show, the community theater group that my wife and I used to work with, Simsbury Light Opera Company, did a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan plays, and I was in a couple and she was in a couple. It's back years ago when we used to do this stuff all the time. But this movie, seriously, if you get a chance to see it, Angela Lansbury's in it as Mabel, and as Ruth, and she's very good, although it depends on how much you like Angela Lansbury. Rex Smith was Frederick. He was okay, very period appropriate. And I thought Linda Ronstadt was wonderful as Mabel. I thought she was great. I know some Sopranos who didn't like her performance, but Sopranos, you never know with them. At any rate, I liked it. And if you get a chance to see it, definitely see it. It's a phenomenal movie. Okay, this one I call Let Them Eat Cake. It says the manager at the local IKEA is retiring, so I sent him a cake. And of course, that cake is some assembly required, and no doubt the instructions are in Swedish. And finally, this is an old gag, but I ran across it again this week, so I thought I'd add it. It's a vampire saying, can I come in? And the maiden is saying, I don't know. Can you? Cursing quietly, the vampire backed away, foiled yet again by the English teacher's pedantry. Yes, being pedantic for the win. An old gag, but a good one. So that was my week this week, and not a lot of technical stuff, but a lot of writing, obviously. This week, I have a very busy week coming up. I'm doing week 1 of my Spring in 3 Weeks course. I'm doing the practical AI tools for Java developers as a no fluff, just stuff virtual workshop, and a workshop on Gradle fundamentals. And I'll try to bring up this issue if it comes up in there. So I had a really good time with it. Hope to see you again. And I look for a more technical video sometime later in the week. Take care, everybody. Thanks for coming by.